And we are live. It's the Revved Up 906 podcast, a Detroit Pistons podcast to be exact. And I'm Hudson.
And I'm Ryan.
And before we get into episode number 38 of season 2, you guys know the deal. I got to talk to you about a few quick things. First off, if you are happening to be tuning into this episode, but you aren't so much a long form content person, make sure to still subscribe and follow us on Instagram, because weekly we are uploading clips and reels around 30 seconds to 45 seconds. So make sure to still subscribe so you are in the know with everything going on with the Detroit Pistons. Usually our clips are highlights of each and every episode. And if you are new to the channel, make sure to hit that subscribe button and like today's video. In this week's episode, we're going to be talking about free agent signings and everybody re-upping their contracts. So if you have any thoughts, comments, questions, opinions, make sure to comment below. We'd love to know your guys' opinions. And if you want to be the first to know when we are posting each and every week, make sure to hit the bell button on our YouTube profile. That will turn on your post notifications. That will go right to your home screen on your phone or computer. Let's get into episode number 38 of season 2, and we are going to be talking about everything that you need to know about the Pistons free agent signings. A few quick shout outs though. Cade Cunningham just finalized his re-signing with the Detroit Pistons on the day we are recording this episode. Ryan, want to give us the details quick on that?
Yeah, so he signed a 5-year, $224 million deal. And it could become up to $269 million.
That is just great for the Pistons organization. He is going to be a big part of this Pistons team for many, many years. Great to see that he wants to be with the Pistons long term. And then we also saw Trajan Langdon sign Simone Fontecchio. Ryan, what are the details on that?
So Fontecchio signed a 2-year, $16 million contract extension with the Pistons, bringing him back.
I like that. That's not too expensive too, Ryan. Like, what are your thoughts on that price? I mean, I think that's pretty good for him.
I think that's a great price for him because it's not like you're overpaying him for what he's worth. But at the same time, you're still giving him the money that he deserves. And that, in that regard, like, congrats, Simone. I'm happy you're back, because what you showed us in 20 games, you showed us a player that could stick with this team going forward for a long time.
Yeah, and that's his first like legit contract signing for the first time in his career. So congrats to him. So we are going to be talking about Tim Hardaway Jr., Malik Beasley, Wendell Moore, and of course the return of Tobias Harris to the Detroit Pistons. And I think a lot of Pistons fans are just ecstatic about that. But first, I kind of want to talk about Trajan Langdon's introductory press conference. And he was questioned by the media about what kind of free agents are we going to bring in with that much cap space that we had at the time. And he quoted by saying that he wanted to bring shooters in to surround Cade Cunningham. And he did that. And that's what I kind of like about Trajan. He's done everything that he's said he was going to do. He really meets all the expectations that he sets for himself. So he brought in Tobias Harris, who shot 35% from the three-point line last year with 5 attempts per game. That's just terrific. That's not like he's shooting 2 or 3 a game. He's shooting 5. And then he brought in Malik Beasley, who shot 41.3% from the three-point line with 6 attempts per game. That's like top echelon in the league. And then he brought in Tim Hardaway Jr. from the Dallas Mavericks, who shot 35% from the three-point line with matching Malik Beasley with 6 attempts per game. So Ryan, we're not just talking about guys that like to hoist up threes and make them here and there. These guys are sharpshooters that make them at a high clip. Ryan, what are some of your thoughts when looking at those statistics that give these cold, hard facts of what these players can do on the court?
Yeah, so when Langdon made the comment, hey, I want to add 3-point shooters, you look and again agree with what you said. He added 3-point shooters around Cade. But to me, they're not just 3-point shooters. You look at every single one of them. Tobias Harris is a good all-around player. Tim
Yep.
Hardaway Jr. is a good all-around player. Malik Beasley is a good all-around player. And then throw Wendell Moore into that category, if healthy, when given the right opportunity, a good overall player. We
Yep.
haven't seen that yet, but still only 22 years old. So still a lot of time to develop and stay healthy with this Pistons team, because it seems like Langdon, no matter, as he said, he wants to create a thread throughout the whole franchise, and starting from the training staff all the way up to Tom Gores. Like he wants there to be a thread and a good connecting team. And Wendell Moore, even though he hasn't done as much as the rest of the guys, if given the opportunity and the right training staff, I think he could get there too. But Tobias Harris, like, great overall player. Like when he was in Detroit, he was doing everything for us. And then past when he was with the Clippers, doing everything following the trade. Then to Philadelphia, doing everything outside of what Joel Embiid is doing or outside of what Tyrese Maxey is doing. He was just one of those guys that would do every little thing and then some. And then Tim Hardaway Jr., same thing in all his stops with Atlanta and New York, and then in Dallas the last couple of years. Like he's been one of those go-to guys that has been there since the beginning, that they can count on him whenever they need him to. Obviously, this playoffs, Tim Hardaway Jr. wasn't leaned on as much, but that's because the Mavericks made it to the finals for the first time in forever. And this is a completely different situation that this team hasn't gone through. Luka's never been to the finals. That was his first finals. That was Kyrie's. I can't even tell you how many finals appearances that is now. But the point is, like, that young Mavericks team, that was their first appearance since 2011 with Dirk. So they haven't been there before. So Tim Hardaway Jr. not being leaned on as much, it's understandable given the fact that kid would shorten up the guys out there in rotation, moving probably from 9 guys down to 6 or 7. And then Malik Beasley, in every stop he's been, he was most notably, probably his best stop was with Milwaukee. And in that span, obviously Milwaukee goes on to win a championship. But even so, when he was with the Lakers there for a short little brief of time in 2022, he was having a good career season too, alongside LeBron and Anthony Davis. So these 3 guys, and then obviously Wendell Moore, that's a different conversation. But these 3 guys all play at a high level, they specialize in shooting, of course, but they can do more than just shoot the ball. Like Malik Beasley is a great facilitator, high basketball IQ, great passer. Tim Hardaway Jr., even though he may not be like, whoa, Tim Hardaway Jr., there you go. He always does all the little between passing, rebounding, shooting. He does it all. And then Tobias, of course, does everything that you want out of a guy in his position. And it's not like he's been bad at any point in time in his career. He's always put up 15 plus points a season, like, and it's been continuing on for his entire career while aging too. So these 3 guys, outside of their shooting abilities, are good all-around players.
You just covered everything in 5 minutes. I think that's the episode. Let's take some time to deep dive on each individual player. And let's start with Tim Hardaway Jr. and his breakdown. Now, when we were doing like our, total descriptive and deep dives on the possible draft prospects, I liked how we talked about the scouting reports, because that's what these NBA scouts are getting very descriptive and watching each player very, very closely. So I wanted to do that with Tobias, Tim Hardaway, and Malik Beasley. So here is Tim Hardaway Jr.'s scouting report, and then we'll talk about his averages from last season. His scouting report starts by saying natural born 3-point shooter, can take over a game when he's hot, has improved his shot selection as he gets later in his career, great ability to get himself open in catch and shoot situations. That's something that Detroit Pistons need badly. Good explosion to attack the rim if necessary, often has tunnel vision with the ball in his hands. He can be below average when spreading the floor and passing the ball. So obviously, Ryan, when you look at that scouting report right away, it hits those hot points of great catch and shoot, explosive to the rim when needed. Some of these roles and specific needs that the Detroit Pistons have. What did his statistics look like on average with the Dallas Mavericks last season?
So this past season, he was averaging around 14 and a half points, 3.5 rebounds, two assists, shooting 40% from the field, 35% from three, and 85% at the line.
Yeah, so I mean that teaches a lot that he can kind of basically fill the Sadiq Bey role that Sadiq had 2 or 3 seasons before. Did it give how many minutes he played during the season?
I'd have to pull that up.
Because I
But
know
I
when
know he had been playing a lot.
yeah, it was around 31 or 28 minutes, I think, when I looked it up, and then it went down to 16, like you mentioned, in the playoffs. Something also too that's noted when talking about Tim Hardaway Jr. Not great at perimeter defending, but that's kind of okay just because we know Jaden Ivey isn't great in the paint defensively, but can push it up the floor a little bit and get to that 3-point line and with his length. And then it's also not a big deal with his below average perimeter defense because of a guy like Tobias Harris, who we know that can guard the 3-4. So if you have a shooter on any given night going up against the Pistons, Tobias can kind of fill that role. Something, Ryan, too, that I thought was interesting is he had a 6'7" wingspan. And as we look through these 3 key players that the Pistons brought in, is they're all very long. And it seems to me that Trajan Langdon's going the kind of way that he went with the Pelicans, bringing in guys like Josh Hart at the time and Brandon Ingram, these little bit longer wingspan players. Because I think in today's NBA, that's proving to be very important to being long on the defensive end when you have these lanky guys trying to go to the rim. I hope that helps the Pistons defense in a way.
Yeah, I have no complaints about acquiring or bringing in guys that are highly talented players and individuals and good people, but also freak of an athlete and extremely long. I don't mind size at all. You look at what we have so far. Jalen Duren is a very, very long, lanky man. Cade is long. Then
Yeah.
Ivey has a big wingspan too. Everywhere you go down this roster, even the resigning of Simone Fontecchio. Simone has a large wingspan also. So all these guys getting brought in, it creates mismatches for opposing teams coming in. Because you look at like my thing is look at Cleveland as an example. And I made note of this even while we were talking about if the possibility arose to draft Stephon Castle, would I do so? And going back to that note of Cleveland, if you look at Cleveland's guard combo, you have Darius Garland and Donovan Mitchell. Darius Garland is not very big. And then Donovan Mitchell, even though he is the prototypical size of a shooting guard, he's also not very big himself either. But he's bigger in the weight department than Garland. So you'd go, oh, I'm going to match Donovan Mitchell up against Cade. But then who are you going to throw against Jaden Ivey? And that would be Darius Garland. But even in that situation, I feel like Ivey is a mismatch to Garland in that scenario. And it just goes across the rest of the league with opposing teams coming in. You want to be able to create mismatches. At any time, it becomes dangerous. You look at Jalen Duren, anytime a guard or a smaller individual is thrown onto him, he's getting a layup, an easy layup every single time. And that goes to, like, you would look back at Tobias Harris with his stint with the Pistons and even in Philly and Los Angeles, when he can play 3, 4, but he could also play the 2 if needed. But he's one of those guys because of his length and because of his size, he can play pretty much anywhere on the floor at once. And because of that, that creates mismatches all the time because he has the speed to play with the guards. He has the size to play with the bigs. And he's just one of those unicorn type players. Tim Hardaway Jr., same thing. He can play the 2, 3, or 4 because of his length and because of his size. And to me, when you have size in the NBA and any given roster team in the league, I think it becomes a big threat. And because there's not a lot of teams that can go up against that on any given night. We made note of that last year, actually, when we're talking like the Pistons need to add some big man depth outside of just Jalen Duren and Isaiah Stewart. And that's when we brought in James Wiseman. Obviously, that didn't work out. But the point remains, like, when we have size, we can compete with just about anyone.
And I just want to look back to just a couple months ago when Quentin Grimes leaves the Detroit Pistons. And what we were thinking about at the end of last season was, what is he going to be able to do? We had a lot of questions. He was a guy that kind of dealt with some injuries, and we wanted him to be the sharpshooter that played solid defense. But then you bring in a guy like Tim Hardaway Jr., and he's going to be able to fill that role for the Detroit Pistons with less question marks. And I think that's great for this Pistons organization. We have too many question marks with this organization. It's good to bring in a guy that played at Michigan University, go Big Blue, and you bring him in and you're like, okay, we're answering a lot of questions here. We're getting a 3-point shooter that hits shots at a high clip while playing pretty good defense, not great defensively around the perimeter, but that's some things you just kind of expect. So we lose a guy in Quentin Grimes, but then boom, we bring in Trajan Langdon, and then he fills that role with less question marks. Ryan, any last final thoughts when talking about Tim Hardaway Jr.?
So to me, again, going off Quentin Grimes and not staying healthy, I want to make note of this too, because I mean, it's self-evident, but for people that don't know, Tim Hardaway Jr. has not played a full season in his career. The closest he's gotten is 81 games and 79 games. And that came his rookie year, which would have been the 81 games, and then 2016, 2017 with 79 games, and then this past season with 79 games. So even at his age of 31 years old, he played 79 games this past season, which is a lot more than Isaiah Stewart, who is significantly younger, and countless other Pistons on this roster. The fact that even though he hasn't played a full season, he pretty much played a full season this past year and was still scoring at a high clip, was playing great offensively, playing decent defensively. Even though he isn't the defender that Quentin Grimes is, he makes up for it offensively that Quentin Grimes could not do. I'm not saying he couldn't do it for his career, but Quentin Grimes hasn't done it yet. And he hasn't scored at the high clip that Tim Hardaway Jr. has. So if you're going off of the two of them alone on who won what, I mean, I'd say we won just because we add a good overall player in Tim Hardaway Jr. that adds shooting. But then we also got 3 second-round picks on top of that. So I'm saying we won that trade. But I'm excited to see what Tim Hardaway Jr. brings to the Pistons.
All right, let's move on to Malik Beasley. This is a guy I'm very excited about for the Detroit Pistons to have. And Ryan, was it 1 year, $6 million contract?
It was a 1 year, $8 million contract.
$8 million. Okay. I just wanted to confirm just so that the people could know for sure. All right. We're going to talk about his averages, but first let's talk about the scouting report that NBA execs have put on Malik Beasley. His scouting report says efficient shooting guard who plays hard on defense, much needed for the Pistons, doesn't try to do too much, shoots open threes, attacks closeouts defensively, and runs the floor in transition, has tunnel vision at times offensively, but has long arms and create disruption on the defensive end. Ryan, want to shoot us with the averages from last season?
So this past season, Malik Beasley averaged 11 points, 4 rebounds, 2 assists, shot 44% from the field, 41% from 3, and 71% at the line. I'll say this on the free throw note, like this year wasn't a fantastic year for him at the line, but career-wise, he's an 80% plus free throw shooter.
Yeah, I mean, to shoot 44% from the field and 41% from the 3-point line is just terrific. I don't know how he does it because, I mean, he's so offensively focused. Usually those types of players struggle with the efficiency side, but he just shows that, you know, he can take his time, and he's not going to be as much of a, you know, catch and shoot kind of player like a Tim Hardaway Jr., but that's going to be nice for a guy like Cade Cunningham who's facilitating. You know, Malik Beasley really likes to hit those back cut plays, cut to the rim. He's just a guy that really moves well offensively. And we can talk about a little bit more his offensive side, but I just wanted to mention his wingspan situation, just like I mentioned with Tim Hardaway Jr. So Malik Beasley sits at 6'4" height, and he has a 6'7" wingspan. His arms are longer than he is tall. It is terrific. So that's goes to my point of I'm hoping with all these long-armed players that they're picking up in this free agency. I know most NBA players are long-armed, but when you have these guards that are so lanky like they are with arms, not even their legs, I think it's going to prove to be great defensively. That's just one of my theories. Ryan, what are some of your first thoughts on Malik Beasley and the Pistons picking him up?
So obviously, great 3-point shooter. Was in this year's past 3-point shooting contest. That's great to see. Even because that shows you he's well recognized around the league. But outside of that, like again, like you mentioned, he is known for his defense. He's one of those guys. There's a reason why the Lakers went out to get him, why LeBron wanted him on that team. He's a great defender. That's something that Lakers team needed in 2022. And then that's what the Bucks went out to go get. Outside of just having Giannis and Chris Middleton and Brook Lopez, they needed an all-around good quality defender, and that's what Malik Beasley is. But he's like the definition of 3-and-D today, except you don't typically see 3-and-D point guards. You typically see 3-and-D wings or around that ballpark, not a point guard. But Malik Beasley, because of his length and because of his size, allows him, and then his shooting ability outside of that too, allows him to be that 3-and-D typical mold. But just what he's doing that at the point guard position is even more incredible to me, because when you think about what he could bring to this team, obviously he's coming off the bench. He's not starting. At least I wouldn't expect him to start, given the fact that I would start Ivey ahead of him. Obviously, I'm starting Cade in front of him. But he's going to be one of those glue guys off the bench for us that will give us good minutes, good quality production at a high rate. And that's something that we wanted to see in Monte Morris this past year when we traded for him in the offseason. We wanted Monte Morris, who is good at defense, but is a high quality shooter. We wanted him to fill that void of coming off the bench, being an instant production piece within our team. But he just wasn't that at all, dealt with injuries here and there. But now, obviously, we trade him at the deadline to acquire Simone Fontecchio, which great trade in my eyes. But what Malik Beasley has the possibility to do and the opportunity to do is be one of those glue guys off the bench, score at a high clip, play great defense, and just run the floor. And what he shows me, obviously, his stats aren't like jump out of the box score crazy, but he's one of those good quality players that any given team would want to have on their roster.
So I was reading a lot of articles about what happened when Malik Beasley was, picked up by the Detroit Pistons with that contract. And from everything I saw is the Pistons and Langdon were going very hard to recruit Buddy Hield. And then we see Buddy Hield want to go to a winning team. He has that quote is that I want to go to a winning team and signs with the Warriors. And then the Detroit Pistons are left in a little bit of a situation on, okay, well, they know they're trying to go the modern route. Malik Beasley was that next best option. And in my opinion, I think Buddy Hield is a great player, but I think I like Malik Beasley a little bit more for this Pistons team because we know that Malik is going to be filling two roles for not only 3-point shooting and just electric scoring, but that defensive end, that really getting in the passing lanes, getting quick out in transition on after turnovers. So I think Buddy Hield is obviously a solid player, but I like Malik Beasley for this Detroit Pistons team. And then also, as far as what role to expect for a Malik Beasley on this Pistons team, is I would expect him, like you said, I think he'll be coming off the bench, and I think he'll get certain starts when, injuries occur like they do every season. But what I want him to be is a better Alec Burks, because we know that Alec Burks had a great stint with the Detroit Pistons. He was a little inconsistent at the end there, but he was just an absolute offensive juggernaut for the Pistons when they needed him to be. And I like that. I love what he offered for the Pistons, but I need Malik Beasley to do that on the offensive end while also setting a precedent on the defensive end. I think also a guy like Malik Beasley is going to help alleviate certain offensive needs that Marcus Sasser would feel pressure to give, and Asar Thompson would have pressure to give. They're going to be able to take a little bit of a step back, being so young, take some time. We might even see a lot less Marcus Sasser because of this trade or this pickup in Malik, just because somebody's going to have to take minutes and lose minutes. And I think Marcus Sasser might see a little bit of less minutes. We'll see in that. But I'm hoping that bringing in a guy like Malik will alleviate some pressure that the second unit would have had last season.
Yeah, you talk about that defensive note. Alec Burks obviously couldn't fill that. And then even Bojan Bogdanovic was, oh my goodness,
Yeah.
that was a train wreck on defense because he was trying to foul every time. But what this addition, what all the additions are telling me was, and honestly, this is crazy to even say this, and not really crazy, but it is kind of crazy. You go back to last year's offseason when we signed Monty Williams, and Monty Williams makes note of, we want to restore the Detroit Pistons, not rebuild, restore. And you look at the players they brought in, the players they drafted, the players that they moved for at the trade deadline. A lot of those guys were not pieces that I'm sitting here as a Pistons fan, knowing what the Pistons have been. I'm not sitting there going like, ooh, these players are good players to make note of what you're trying to do. This offseason, what Langdon's trying to do is restore the Pistons, but also make a modern twist on it. And all these guys that have been brought in, I'm sitting there going like, yeah, they fit what the Pistons identity has been in the past. Some of these guys like Tobias Harris obviously played for the red, white, and blue at some point in time in his career. And everybody loved him here. He played great for us. He was one of those players that if given the opportunity, great pieces around him, obviously Stan Van Gundy wasn't going to win us anything, but that team was a little messy, but the point is Tobias Harris coming in, great piece to the team, and obviously built around him at the time. We could have probably done some damage in the playoffs, but what Malik Beasley adds, 3 and D. What Tim Hardaway adds is pretty much 3 and D, but just less D. And then Tobias Harris, good all-around player. These 3 players, to me, tells me that more so of the restore plan that was being talked about last year than what the players that were getting added in last year, what they ended up being. And I think Malik Beasley, if he were to fill what Alec Burks did and what Bojan did offensively, but then bring out that defensive side of him and really make a presence like you've mentioned, I think if you add the defense into this and a true leader on the second unit, somebody who will talk when he needs to, which Malik Beasley has done in his career. And I think if you add that, and this team's going to be flying. You look at the Pelicans, what Langdon did with them. Jose Alvarado was one of those guys where he'll call you out. Like he's gonna call you out. He's gonna work his tail off. That's what I see in Malik Beasley. Obviously, I would take, no offense to Malik Beasley, but I would take Jose Alvarado over Beasley any day. But I still see those small little notes that Langdon went out to get and Jose Alvarado in Malik Beasley, who can shoot, who can facilitate, and who can defend at a high rate. And I love this addition and pickup of Beasley.
So I've been reading a lot on Pistons community pages and Instagrams about how there's so much trade talk with Jaden Ivey and what's going to happen with him. And I read an article from DetroitBadBoys.com talking about how adding Malik Beasley and Tim Hardaway Jr. may change Jaden Ivey's role. Here's a quote from that article. Adding roughly 4,500 minutes from Beasley and Hardaway Jr., 2 players who are pretty well locked in at the wing, at shooting guard, and small forward, while still not having a point guard, might mean Detroit is ready to put the ball in Ivey's hands. as the de facto reserve point guard in bench lineups. So basically what this article is saying, when you add two guys that have similar roles or positions as a guy like Jaden Ivey, may mean that he might be the backup point guard for Cade Cunningham. And what we saw Monty Williams do with Detroit, with Jaden Ivey late last season, was put him at point guard quite a bit and see what he can do passing wise. And we all know with his time at Purdue that he was the starting point guard. So this might mean that Jaden Ivey is in less trade talk and more point guard talk. Ryan, what are some of your thoughts on if Jaden Ivey would have some time at point guard with adding a lot of these small forward guards?
See, to me, I wouldn't mind seeing Ivy at the one, but at the same time, I feel like he really is more of a guard, of a shooting guard rather than a point. And honestly, even though I think Ivy wasn't playing at a he was playing at a high rate, but also wasn't. Look back at his rookie year, he was better offensively than he was this year, but he was better defensively this year than he was last year. What Ivy can do is I think, I mean, obviously, I think he has a role at playing the one, but I think having an electric player alongside Cade in regards to somebody who can move with purpose, who has the speed, who has the intangibles there, I think that's kind of, to me, a better fit for Ivy than seeing him as a point guard. But also, it's kind of a little disrespectful to me when you have Ivy playing the one, because like I don't think Ivy, I think he could on a maybe a championship contending team, but I don't see Ivy being a backup. I don't see that at all. So obviously there's a lot of great players who have played in the second units on past teams too, but I don't see Ivy necessarily being a second unit player. What I see out of him is either he's starting or he's getting moved, and that's the bottom line. It's either he's starting at guard or he's getting moved, and obviously I'd like to see him on the bench too, but at the same time, I just you drafted him at pick number 5, you drafted him high, and now you're gonna move him to the bench for the longevity of the rest of his career. And to me, it throws me off a little bit. But again, I'm fine either way. And I don't think the addition of Beasley and Tim Hardaway Jr. is going into the side of things like, oh, Jaden Ivey is all of a sudden going to be just a bench player and that's it. I think Ivy has the ability to play at a high rate starting. I mean, I'd take him on the bench too, but again, like I don't think these two additions are writing on the wall saying, Ivy, you're going down to the bench. I'm sorry, but because I think Ivy can play at that high level, and we saw that numerous times this past year. But it'd be interesting to see the dynamic behind that. I'm curious what you think on it.
Yeah, I kind of go back and forth on it too. I think that, like you said, we saw shines of Jaden Ivey showing, that he can play at a high level. For me, though, it comes down to consistency. I like seeing consistency in the numbers, in the statistics. And for me, maybe Jaden Ivey going to the bench would help him find a consistent role. We've seen last couple seasons him going back and forth. Right before the season started last year, we had an episode talking about, is Jaden Ivey going to be on the bench this season? And we saw that he did start most of the season. I don't think Malik Beasley is going to be an automatic starter on this Pistons team. I don't think Tim Hardaway Jr. is either. I think it's going to be a game time decision for the coaching staff to see what happens there. And maybe a training camp situation is what decides this decision. But JB Bickerstaff has a tough decision when when Trajan added guys like this. I think it takes Jaden Ivey definitely out of the trade talk a little bit more, because these guys aren't necessarily slashers. I think there is a role for a great slasher like Jaden Ivey. Just time will tell with things like this. I just really hope we see Jaden Ivey make a big jump. I also don't think he's too good to be a bench player. I think he might need that time in the trenches to kind of develop. Let's take some time to talk about the return of Tobias Harris. First off, Ryan, what was his contract situation?
So Tobias signed a 2-year, $52 million contract.
Wow. He got that payday, dude. He got that payday. Before we talk about his averages last season with the Sixers, I'm going to talk about his scouting report real briefly. It says he is an above average scorer who can get buckets from all three levels. You know, the listeners know we love that. Outside shooting efficiency has improved drastically last couple seasons, causes matchup problems because he's too quick for most power forwards and has the post up game to take advantage of smaller defenders. Just a so-so defensive player, though he can defend multiple positions. Tendency is to be invisible in games when he is not actively in offensive sets. So known to kind of disappear certain games when other players are hot. Ryan, what were his averages last season with the Sixers?
So this past year, he actually put up better numbers in his career averages, which is great. But this past year, 17 points, 7 rebounds, 3 assists, shot 48% from the field, 35% from three, and 88% at the line.
Great free throw shooter. He is what some would say a stat sheet stuffer. To talk about his wingspan compared to his height, we talked about it to the two last players, and the reason I see like a thing happening here, a tendency with Trajan Langdon, is Tobias Harris is 6'7" in height with a 6'11" wingspan. I mean, this is a dude that nearly a 7-foot wingspan. That is just insane. He has played 897 career games, 777 starts. Ryan, what are some of your first thoughts on Tobias Harris and why he might mix well with this young Detroit Pistons team?
Well, when you go back to any stop he's been at, starting in Orlando, coming to Detroit, then going to the Clippers, and then ending it in Philly before coming back here once again, he's been the go-to leader on all of those teams. As a rookie, he even was a leader on that team in Orlando. With the Pistons, in the first stint, leader on that team. Clippers, leader on that team. Philly, leader on that team outside of Joel Embiid. And to me, we haven't had a true defined leader. And it's crazy to say that when we have Cade Cunningham. But I think Cade is the leader on this team. I don't think there's any question there. But when you have a guy who's handled the pressure of playing with the Pistons before, coming back, and then also having the pressure in Orlando, having the pressure with the Clippers and the 76ers, and being able to handle it at a high with ease and still play at his high rate that he plays at. I think the leader side of Tobias Harris, to me, is, and not only the leader but the vet experience, to me, is what is the defining like addition to this team. It's not necessarily the all-around player, the shooting, or any of that, or anything stat related. It's the person. Adding this person to this team is going to help this team, because Langdon made note, obviously, that he wanted to add 3-point shooters in, but then he also made note that he wants to add guys into the team that are going to help bring this team to where it should become and what it should become. And that's what Tobias Harris is. When you look back at any successful team, they've had a vet presence there. They've had a leader on that team, even if it's a second unit. You go back to the Miami Heat, having Udonis Haslem coming off the bench for pretty much the last 8 years of his career, or just sitting there and just being one of those player bench coaches. And that was a very high commodity and quality for the Miami Heat, and those players on that team, having a leader who has been in that spot before, but also is taking a step back and going like, hey, you guys are up, but I'm going to help you along the way. That's what Tobias Harris, I think, is going to bring to this team. Is he's going to bring the leader side of the thing, the understanding of, okay, this is how you play at a high rate, this is how you be successful, and this is how you grow and develop the right way, and not just go out and have late nights multiple times in a row, or I'm not saying any of the players do that, but the point remains Tobias Harris is a good all-around person and a great vet and a good leader to have as an addition to this team outside of what he can do shooting the ball and being a stat sheet stuffer and defensively what he can do. I think the person being added into this Pistons team is going to take this team to the next level of having a true all-around vet and leader coming in.
So I want to talk about his previous stint with the Detroit Pistons because it's going to show us something about where Tobias's career has went since his time with the Detroit Pistons. This quote goes by saying Harris returns to Detroit, where he spent 3 seasons from 2016 to 2018 and led the Pistons to the Eastern Conference playoffs in 2016. In 157 career games with Detroit, he averaged 17 points, 5.3 rebounds, 2 assists, and 32.1 minutes per game per NBA.com. Has anyone noticed the correlation? That he has stayed that consistent. His statistics are nearly identical just last season with the Sixers, and that was from 2016 to 2018 on average. That's just incredible, right? I mean, and since he's been gone, he has averaged nearly the same statistics. That's just incredible. That shows how consistent this player, Tobias Harris, really is in his NBA career. And that's who we're adding back to the Detroit Pistons.
Yeah, and I'll add a note to that. In 6 seasons, while aging, keep that in mind, he's an aging player. In 6 seasons, while aging in Philly, he's continued to put up good numbers, averaging nearly 18 points, 7 rebounds, 3 assists, shooting pretty much 50% from the field, 37% from 3, and 86% at the line while aging. That is spectacular. Right. And it goes back to even when he was with the Pistons, he was playing great this past year, playing great, but in the 6 seasons in that span has played even better than that. Is just crazy to me while continuing to age and just be one of those old NBA vets in the league. The fact that he's played at such a high clip and just it's amazing to see. That's what I love when we add in all these players in the past and then even now when you have guys like Tobias Harris who has played consistent throughout his entire career. I love adding in guys like that because consistency is key in the NBA. We saw that in years past with Marvin Bagley. He couldn't stay consistent. He was never a clear-cut player within our organization. And James Wiseman couldn't develop at a high rate and go off of that and be consistent. And there's just been countless other guys to Bojan Bogdanovic in the later stretches before we moved him was all of a sudden inconsistent. Same with Alec Burks. But I think to them, the writing was on the walls a little bit. But the point is, like, when we can add consistent players into a young team, good things happen. I'll just say that good things happen. And the fact that he was able to do that while aging in 6 years in Philadelphia, in a more limited role of not being the guy when you have Joel Embiid there too, like that's just incredible.
Yeah, and now we just have to bring back KCP, and then the team will be complete. We need to bring back all the Pistons players in the past that played really well for us just in rough times. I'm excited to see how Tobias Harris fits within this team. I'm also super excited to see him play along Cade Cunningham and see the old generation with the new generation. I think that's so cool. And I was watching Tobias Harris's signing video with Trajan Langdon right alongside him on the Pistons Instagram. And, you know, Tobias didn't seem super hyper or anything. He seemed very content. And I think that's a great word to hear and see visually by a guy like Tobias coming back to a small market team with a fat contract. He just seems content in this later stage of his career. And I'm really happy to see that. And when he departed from the Detroit Pistons via trade to the Clippers, he wasn't happy about it. He was upset. He did not want to leave. And I think that's the kind of guys that we want around this organization with some of these younger guys. And we know that Cade's content with his new 5-year contract. I think this Pistons organization is in a very healthy stage right now, unlike the way we ended last season.
Yeah, last season we were decaying, we were dying. And what Langdon has done in such a short period of time has almost rejuvenated this Pistons team. He's given us hope, that's for sure.
Yeah.
When you look back at the moves he's made, Tobias Harris, Tim Hardaway Jr., Malik Beasley, and then even Wendell Moore, like what he's done. And then also, too, the fact that and go back to the draft, we moved up from 55 to 37 to draft Bobby Clintman. But then we also got another second round pick on top of that. So not only did we move the 55th overall pick in the second round of the draft up to 37, we also got another pick on top of that while getting the player we wanted and Bobby Clintman, who should have been a first round pick, late first round pick, given that, but was a projected late first round pick. Got him at 37 overall. And we moved up and didn't have to give up anything except for one pick. And we got a player and a pick in return. That was a great move. What Langdon has done in such a short period of time has given us Pistons fans a little bit more hope than what we've had in a long time.
Yeah. And yeah, it just feels like, as a commentator following the Detroit Pistons very, very closely, and feeling like I'm always looking at where the community is as a whole, as a healthiness, whether it's toxic or not. And it just feels like everyone seems pretty happy with the way things are going with this organization. And I think if Trajan didn't have all the fans on his side, he definitely does now, bringing in a guy like Tobias Harris. Ryan, any final thoughts on Tobias Harris? Any statistics, any last things before we get into the next player?
All I'm going to say is I'm happy he's back because he was upset that the Pistons traded him. Every Pistons fan at that time was upset that the Pistons moved him.
Yep.
And we obviously full blame onto Sam Van Gundy. Because I'm sorry, Tobias Harris was playing at a higher rate at that point in time than Blake Griffin was. Even though Blake Griffin had, it pains me to say this, even though he did put up good numbers while in Detroit, I'm taking Tobias Harris over Blake Griffin any day, 100%, because who's in the league currently still and who is not? And that is Blake Griffin is not in the league, and Tobias Harris is playing at a high rate, had over 17 points a game, 7 rebounds, 3 assists, shot nearly 50% from the field, 35% from 3, and 88% at the line this past season. And Blake Griffin is sitting at home just chilling. So off that alone, Tobias Harris, welcome back to Detroit.
All right, that puts a cap on the first 3 players, the really key players. Now we brought in one more guy, in Wendell Moore from Duke. Any statistics on him?
So career-wise, obviously this past year he didn't really get a whole lot of playing time, dealt with injury. But his career statistics, and people in the Pistons community have been roasting a little bit, going like, "Who is this guy?" But he's been averaged 1 point, nearly a rebound, nearly an assist, shooting 44% from the field, 8% from 3, and then is not applicable at the free throw line because he hasn't shot any free throws. But he career statistics, obviously not incredible. Has dealt with injuries, but you go back to his time at Duke, he was one of those key players on that team. And then not only that, but Coach K knows what he's talking about. He's one of the greatest basketball minds of all time. In my opinion, he's the greatest college basketball coach of all time, and that's saying a lot because you have Bobby Knight and you have countless others. You could throw Jay Wright into that conversation as well, but there's been countless others that have been at that high rate, and I think Coach K is just a clear top favorite for me. But he knows what he's talking about, and he's a great recruiter. He's the same guy that recruited Trajan Langdon out of Alaska, aka the Alaskan Assassin, who is now our president of basketball operations. I think there's a connection there. And I think obviously, when you look back at the move, I think this is a move where you can't pass up an opportunity to get a young player who played at a high rate at the college level, who really hasn't been given a full opportunity yet, and has a lot of time left to develop and grow. And what Wendell Moore did at Duke was a 3-and-D player. He was a three-point shooter. He was a great defender. And that's what I think Langdon saw in, like, I barely have to give up anything right now. And I can get Wendell Moore brought in, because this was a part of that second round trade. Is we moved 55 up to 37 and got Wendell Moore on top of that also. So, like, the fact that we got two players for the price of one pick, and Wendell Moore is a flyer that I'd be willing to take on, even if he sits on the bench the entire time. I'd be willing to pay him because I think the upside is there. Obviously, look back at college, like I mentioned, he was a good player, and Coach K just doesn't go out and recruit anybody. And so, because of that, I think we're getting a good player and a good person, and I'm excited about the move. Obviously, he's probably going to be ending up in the G League at times, but I am willing to take on the flyer of him. And I'll make note of this too. His remaining years left on his contract, he has 2 years, $7 million remaining. So he has time to sit there and develop. And I know 7 million is kind of a lot for him, given the fact that he really hasn't done anything. But blame Minnesota. They paid him like a 5-year, $11 million contract, which is kind of crazy considering what he's done thus far. But they believed in him too before they traded him. And if Langdon believes in him, I believe in him.
Just so for a little bit more info on him, his NBA comparisons are Caleb Martin and Bruce Brown. Here's a quick little scouting report on him. A skilled and physical slasher with terrific playmaking skills, can play from the wing or at the point and run the offense from both locations. Improved dramatically as a shooter this season, making him a legit threat to play on and off the ball in offense. Yeah, like you said, he's obviously going to be a big part of the G League. We'll see if he, makes some explosive plays in the G League and gets a shot with the Pistons as a role player or as a 10-day contract, or not rather than that, but just like maybe 10 days on the Pistons as a whole. We'll see what that lies, and we'll let Trajan Langdon make some of those decisions. Hopefully you liked today's episode. Make sure to comment below your thoughts on the free agent signings by Trajan Langdon to the Detroit Pistons. We like them for the most part. I mean, we can't really complain too much. It'll be exciting to see what these 3 players, maybe 4 players, add to this Pistons team. A lot to look forward to in this upcoming season. Make sure to like and subscribe, and we will see you guys in the next episode. Peace.